honorable members. Having said so, we are today dealing with the what is this? With the report with regards to what we have been dealing with, the draft report, which I understand has been forwarded to honorable members. Any apologies very quickly?
Yes, Chair, I've got only one apology from Mr. Mtenjane. He's going to join us after 12. Mr. Kula is trying to log in. I'm assisting him here. He's going to join us anytime now.
Okay. Having said so, honorable members.
Chair, on a point of order.
Yes.
Chair, Mr. Mtenjane and Honorable Mtenjane and Honorable Takosa both attend this meeting, and I understand that meetings are open to any members of Parliament. I absolutely have no problem with that. But if we are counting them from an apologies perspective, only one member of the EFF is actually a voting member, and that would be Honorable Takosa. So I'd really like clarity as to why we are taking an apology from Mr. Mtenjane.
No, let me explain from my understanding. Is that Mr. Mtenjane is officially an alternate to the committee. Can you please switch our background, please? And there is somewhere where I don't know whether is a management of the house matters there. So my understanding, Honorable Mela, I don't know whether we should take that as an issue. His apologies on the basis that he is always in attendance of the meeting and officially is an alternate. But I will check whether is there anything wrong when an alternate puts an apology of not attending the meeting. Okay, can we go to the issues that we're going to do? Honorable members, I think before we undertake, and I'm going to have a huge challenge here because my laptop doesn't want to open, but I'm using the iPad and the phone. So it's going to be a little bit of a challenge, but I will try my level best when it comes. Honorable Madam, you want to raise an issue?
No, Chairperson.
Yes.
It's me, Honorable Mahlaule. I want to rise on Rule 156 of alternates.
Yes.
156.2 that says an alternate acts as a member when the member for which the alternate was appointed is absent or has vacated office until the vacancy is filled. Now, my understanding was that Honorable Mtenjane was the official, as you put it, the official alternate, which makes him a member in the absence of the Honorable, I can't remember who it was. I think it's Dlamini Masha, who was a member. So the apology is well in order, Chair, because he is a member in the absence of Honorable Marshal Dlamini, unless something has changed. Thank you.
No, let's leave. That's why I said the apology, as far as I understand, is on his official capacity as an alternate who also attends the meeting, but it's just an apology. It doesn't arise. It stands that he becomes a member in the absence of the member that has been appointed. But I'm saying I will check whether, by the way, the problem with Parliament when it comes to apologies, and I've raised this thing, is that it is not written whether even the apology there is a requirement to state why a person is not in the meeting. Well, for me, then it would have been a subject matter if you don't state. But honorable members, for now, can we move so that we deal with the agenda of the day? Can I ask that?
Please, Chair. Kere, please, Chair, can we move with the agenda, please?
Can I ask Mr. Kotze to just outline, because we thought it's important before we deal with this thing, we deal with the issue of what is contained with regards or expected with regards to specifically the recommendations of the committee. Can I ask Mr. Kotze, you must take practice, Ari. Take lesser time, please.
Will do. Thank you, Chair. Chair, I'll just take members quickly through the procedural guide to committee recommendations. Now, a committee conducts its business on behalf of the House and must therefore report back to the House on matters referred to it by the House for consideration and report. A committee's report may be submitted for consideration or merely for information purposes. A committee report published for information appears in the ATC and forms part of the parliamentary record. However, no further action on the part of the House is required. If a committee report is tabled for consideration, it means that the report requires a decision of the House. The report will then be placed on the order paper. That's why, Chair, in our reports, oversight reports, budget vote reports, BRRR reports, at the end of the reports, we indicate a report to be considered. If the House adopts a report, it lends the recommendations contained therein the force of a formal assembly resolution. The advantage of a committee reporting its recommendations to the House for formal consideration is that if the House adopts the committee report, it gives the recommendations the force of a formal assembly resolution pursuant to its constitutional function of conducting oversight. The Speaker will engage at the level of the executive authority to communicate recommendations adopted by it to the Minister. The House then also monitors executive compliance with the recommendations. When a response is received by the executive, it is announced in the ATC and referred to the committee from whose report the recommendations emanated. Then 1. Rules, legislation, and principles applicable to committee reports and recommendations. Specific National Assembly rules in the 9th edition of the rules of the National Assembly applicable to committee reports are NA Rule 166, which deals with general provisions for committee reporting, NA Rule 308, which deals with specific requirements for committees reporting on bills dealing with Section 75. NA Rule 312, which deals with specific requirements for committees reporting on bills relating to Section 76. And NA Rule 342, reporting applicable to international agreements. Now, committee reports and recommendations are scanned to ensure that recommendations that the National Assembly is to adopt conform to the following: the Constitution of 1996, the principle of separation of powers, respect for other spheres of government, and the authority of National Executive and its accountability to the National Assembly. 2. Direction of recommendation to the Executive Authority. It should always be borne in mind that constitutionally, Parliament engages at the level of the executive authority at national level. This must inform the drafting of any report to be submitted to the House. Recommendations to be adopted by the House should be directed at the relevant minister in the national sphere. House decisions are formally communicated to the responsible minister. Committees also need to bear in mind that should the House adopt a recommendation contained in a committee report, the minister is expected to report back to the House. An important note, Chair. It is inappropriate for a committee to request that a minister or department report directly back to the committee. In instances where this has occurred, amendments to the report have been moved in the House to the effect that the minister reports back to the House and not to the committee. The minister submits his or her response to the Speaker, who tables the response in the ATC and refers it to the relevant committee. This also facilitates monitoring of executive compliance. Now, examples of those, Chair, is where, previous recommendations where we say that the minister should report back to the committee on the solar water heater program during the 4th term. So that refers to those type of recommendations, Chair. Number 3, committee recommendations to be motivated. A committee report should provide the House with enough information to enable the House to take a decision about whether it wishes to adopt the recommendations contained in the committee's report. For example, a recommendation which briefly states that regulations to control movement of vessels should be put in place, but does not contain any motivation or explanation in the body of the report is vague. The recommendation is not sufficiently motivated to enable the House to take an informed decision. Now, I'm just thinking an example of that one, for example, Chair, where let's say if the committee say the minister should regularly or continuously update the committee on the Grand Inga hydro project. As it states, there's no motivation as to why. So that's an example, Chair. So we must motivate why. Number 4, distinction between spheres of government. Recommendations should make a distinction between the different spheres of government. There should also be regard for different areas of competency in accordance with the principles of cooperative government. Certain recommendations can be interpreted as interference in another sphere of government. An example would be a recommendation that, for example, municipalities must review long-term leases granted to private clubs. Then committees also include recommendations in their reports which do not fall within their functional area. Number 5, recommendations pitched at operational level. As a general principle, committees should engage in oversight matters at a national policy level rather than an operational level. Where operational problems are identified by a committee, they should be linked to broader policy issues. It is from this perspective that recommendations should be identified. Often, operational problems are identified which are internal or local in nature and should be resolved at this level. For example, officials should have regular staff meetings. In these cases, the recommendation does not have any and does not fall within the Assembly's jurisdiction. Number 6, instructing rather than requesting. A recommendation contained in a committee report should, as far as possible, steer clear of phrasing that instructs rather than requests or urges. By following this approach, not only is the principle of separation of powers respected, but it also allows for a situation where additional explanations or alternatives can be brought to the fore by the executive. Parliament can only instruct by way of legislation. Number 7, language usage and structure. Where language use is poor and the report is unstructured, this will reflect badly on the image, not necessarily of the committee, but of the National Assembly as well. For example, reference in a committee report to a certain nationality as thugs or drug lords is a negative reflection on a group of people. The status of the House is indeed affected if it adopts a report which is poorly worded or vague. This also obstructs effective implementation of recommendations. With this in mind, recommendations in particular should be drafted as carefully and precisely as legal provisions to ensure that the views of the committee and the House are accurately captured and effectively communicated. 8. Adoption of reports that contain no recommendations. Committee reports sometimes contain no recommendations and do not require any decision of the House, but are nevertheless published for consideration. This is unnecessary, and chairpersons and committees should, in terms of best practice, make an assessment of whether a report needs to be formally considered by the House. It would be sufficient for the House to note these reports, but in fact, they often do not have to be placed on the order paper at all. An ATC publication is sufficient in this instance. This unnecessarily loads the order paper of the House. Number 9, reference to public officials, individuals, and organizations by name. In view of the impact of references by name to individuals and organizations, discretion is required when drafting a committee report. Also, when criticizing public officials, it should always be borne in mind that the minister is finally responsible for actions of his or her department. Concerns about the actions of officials should therefore be directed at the level of the minister to address accordingly. Number 10, recommendations directed to provinces and municipalities. Recommendations directed to provincial and local government executives are prevalent in committee oversight reports. This is usually due to implementation of national executive action being done in partnership with local or provincial executives. Although this practice is not desirable, this challenge has been circumvented by directing the report to the national executive responsible and requesting that they convey the recommendations contained therein to the relevant provincial or local executive. Although committees are empowered to receive presentations from any person, entity, or body, it should be kept in mind that the National Assembly conducts oversight of national sphere of government, with the national executive being accountable to Parliament. Therefore, recommendations emanating from oversight should be directed to the national executive. And that's my story, Chair. My story is 8. So, yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Kotze. Honorable members, we have given members the report, the draft report. I want to start because we have heard the recommendation. I'm not sure if there is any issues of grammatic arrangement issues. I think they can arrange. Second, on the findings or observations, we would have gone to them, but I'm sure members can have read them. The only issue I think we can explain on the findings and the observation is that they are just an expression of what had been stated by the department. They are not something that is new or invented through the committee. They are just what we have observed. If we like it, would say they reflect more points of emphasis on what the department had emphasized on. But without any further delaying, honorable members, I want to check because okay, let me see here. Is there anyone who wants to have a take on the findings and recommendations?
Chairperson.
Yes, Honorable Mailan.
Chair,
I see
my one concern.
I see Honorable. After that, Honorable Mahlaule. Yes, Honorable Mailan.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chair, my one concern is the issue that I raised when the department presented its APP on or 2 weeks ago, and that was the issue around the nuclear new build. Now, my concern is that we don't have any detail whatsoever in the APP or the budget as to exactly how that is going to be rolled out. And it's basically just, we're doing this and we're going to procure it by 2024. I would ask that we recommend that in this regard, the department should detail exactly what their plans are for this project.
Okay, can I hold on you there, Honorable Melan? We're coming to the recommendations.
Oh, sorry, Chair.
Yeah, we're just dealing. Remember, that's why I tried to explain to say the findings and observations are just an emphasis of what the department had expressed